Welcome. I'm Sherry Gardner. I'm a member of the Circles team. We'll be here as a technology facilitator for this session. Please let me know if you have any questions or difficulties. This is the Towards Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion session, which is an expertise connection session. It was designed to have leaders in the Circles community with expertise on a topic to share information and examples with participants who want to learn more about the topic, to provide a forum for participants to discuss how they might incorporate the topic into their work, and to broker connections between both community members around a topic and the presenters. As you go through this session, I hope you get a chance to learn and think about what to take to the strategy sessions tomorrow, where we start to make plans for how we can remake broadening. I'm now going to turn it over to Sherry Shih.
Wonderful, thank you. I am having trouble to figure out, what are you guys seeing?
The slides.
You are? Slides. Perfect. Yeah. All right. And if I move it up here, are you still seeing the slides?
Yep.
Moving my windows around for me. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you for choosing this session to join us today. I'm Sherry Shih. I'm a principal scientist at BSCS Science Learning and a facilitator of this session. And I have a number of projects that are specifically looking at ways to support equity and inclusion in computer science and introductory computer science. Quick overview of our agenda. We are going to spend 5 minutes giving brief introductions of our facilitators of the session today. Then we'll spend some time starting with the introductory definition of the terms equity, accessibility, and inclusion, so we're all on the same page. And these are definitions that you can remake, redefine, recontextualize for your own purposes, but just a starting point. Then I'm going to put everyone into a small group where we will be looking at 2 scenarios and answering some prompts and questions. And then we will reconvene for about 15 minutes as a large group, and then we'll close out the session. And with that, I want to introduce my 3 other wonderful co-facilitators. We've planned wonderful materials for you today and activities, and I hope you enjoy them. Yolanda, would you like to go first?
Sure, yes. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining us. I am Yolanda Rankin. I'm an assistant professor at Florida State University in the School of Information. I happen to be very much involved and invested in doing research that does push for equity, inclusion, and accessibility. My specific research interests lately have centered around using Black feminist epistemologies like Black feminist thought and intersectionality to center the experiences of Black women in computing. We've positioned them in this way because Black women are presented as experts of their lived experiences, their agents of knowledge. And so this is just one example of how we can apply Black feminist epistemology, not just for Black women, but it can be applied to any minoritized group. And so my research digs deeply into looking at how systems of power, these structures lead to oppression of historically excluded populations, and how we can work together to dismantle those systems of oppression by first understanding what the power dynamics are, and then creating what we call opportunities in which everyone is seen and has a voice in the experience, so that we can empower these populations that are typically not given an opportunity to express themselves or to be seen as experts or leaders in a particular setting in doing that. So my work looks at computer science education. It also looks at STEM education. It looks at college as one setting, as well as K through 12 education, more likely informal environments is what I focus on. And so that's pretty much how I ended up in this space. I'm delighted again to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Maria. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Sherry. I'm Aaron Klein. I'm based in the Wall Lab at the Stanford School of Medicine. Our focus has been to how can we leverage mobile and AI technology to help enrich the lives of kids with autism in particular, by enforcing emotion recognition and other understanding of the world around them. So along the way, I think what I can contribute to facilitating this session is both kind of a background, pretty strong background in a technical approach to any questions for accessibility here, but also along the way, the things I've learned as far as how to include and give equity to the kids that we try to help here along the way on every stage in project development, all the way from grant writing through design of a project to implementing that project, all the way to assessment. There's different challenges to really getting these kids' voices heard and on each step of the project. So if anyone's interested, either from a technical perspective, from a developer perspective on how to be more inclusive, or from an ASD or more broadly inclusion of those with disabilities, I'm happy to contribute to that. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. It should be a great session.
Great, thank you, Erin. Kelly?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session. I am Kelly Mills. I am the Computational Thinking Project Director at Digital Promise, and I've engaged in several projects to include students experiencing marginalization in computer science and STEM learning, and have dug deeply into inclusive design principles with both students and community members. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. Going back to share my slides for a moment, and I realize that are you actually looking at them in the full?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to do the full screen because then I can't see you guys, and I really do like to see your faces as I'm talking online. So just a couple quick definitions about accessibility, inclusion, and equity. This is a definition that I pulled from the CAS.org website, which defines accessibility as being shaped by what we do or what we need to do in our interactions with the environment and our personal preference. In their definition, they say that educational materials and technologies are accessible to people with disabilities if they are able to acquire the same information and engage in the same interactions and enjoy the same services as people who do not have disabilities. And on the diagram on the right, you can see that a person with a disability can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services in an equally effective, equally integrative manner with substantially equivalent ease of use as a person without a disability. This is just a starting working definition. By inclusion, I draw the definition from National Center for Women in Computing, which defines inclusion as creating learning environments that are accessible and welcoming of students' identities, backgrounds, differences, and perspectives without barrier or judgment. This was a definition that was in the NC-WIT Microsoft Guide to Inclusive Computer Science Education. And so I always think of inclusion as, opening the circle and being inviting and welcoming. So a definition for equity, and I know this is a very, very quick session and definition, but as illustrated in this picture, equality is the idea that you have evenly distributed tools and assistance. So you see the benches are the same, the stools are the same, and the books are the same. But within equality, just having the same tools and assistance is not the same. Equity, on the other hand, you have customized tools that identify and address the inequalities. So the person who needs a higher stool can get those resources to be able to access that information. So there's a tie between accessibility and equity. But as we know, equity is actually not enough to redress the inequalities that exist. So if inequalities are the unequal access to opportunities, and we just defined equity as coming up with these tools, and so from Shel Silverstein's book, The Giving Tree, which is where this picture comes from, that you have equity where you have the different ladders, you're helping this kid get to the apples, but that doesn't really fix the system. And I think we heard that in Nikki Washington's talk just now, where you have to go and address the structures and systems that prevent equity from happening, right? And so justice means fixing the system. So you see these pulleys that's pulling the tree in one direction and these other supports that are pushing the tree, so that both the tools and opportunities are able to be open to everyone. So that's just basically some kind of baseline definitions for this session. And I really invite, because this is an expertise exchange session, that we all have expertise to bring to the table. So do bring those into the conversations. So next, what we're going to do is provide 2 scenarios, and within your group, you get to choose which one you like to do. And there are some questions that we would like you to explore within these scenarios. I'm wondering, Yolanda, would you be willing to share what those questions are? And maybe just a tiny bit about the what each scenario is about, and then they can read them in their small groups.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes. All right. So let me minimize my window so I can see. Okay. All right.
Do you want me to stop sharing? I'm happy to do that.
So you want me to go, just so I'm clear, to go over the scenarios, correct?
Sure.
Yes. All right. So let me, okay. So let me share my screen so that everyone can. All right. Okay. All right. So this is scenario 1, and these are fabricated experiences. Let me say that first and foremost. And so I start with a lived experience, meaning this is someone's experience, and they've shared this with me, and I'm sharing it with you. So this is a graduate student in a CS program. Again, this is real, and this scenario is fake. And so she says, and I quote, "I wasn't really kissing up to the right people, even though I had been doing research since I got there. I was seeing other people getting invited into these labs, and I wasn't that kind of, made me feel like, well, maybe they just don't want me to work with them. Maybe they don't think I'm smart enough. I just thought, okay, if I take your class, if I do well, if I'm telling you that I'm interested and I'm talking to you, that will get me an invite." And that just wasn't so. So that's that student's lived experience. And this is a scenario. You come across a funding opportunity that explicitly states that broadening participation in computing is a required component of the research proposal. You recognize that African American Black students, Native American Indian students, and Latinx students are less than 10% of the student population in the department, and decide to focus on recruitment and retention of these underrepresented populations in your department as the primary focus and the broader impact in your proposal. As the PI, you outline recruitment efforts at local high schools situated predominantly African American, Black, and Latinx communities, and on Native American Indian reservations. You reach out to minority serving institutions to request a letter of support to be included in your proposal application. Only one MSI faculty member agrees to write a letter of support and sends it to you. You also set aside funds in the budget to compensate 2 undergraduate students, preferably members of underrepresented populations, as research assistants during the summer months. After going through your institution's approval process, you submit the proposal and wait patiently for a decision. So in this scenario, what we're asking you to do is to reflect and think about this experience. And what we're hoping that you will begin to appreciate is the differences between what has been the focus on equity, diversity, inclusion, and to understand that when we work towards equity, it's a very different experience, and it may require different strategies for achieving this. And so 3 questions to think about are, which actions of the PI towards achieving equity rather than just diversity? And given this scenario, what does equity look like? And does it look the same for each historically excluded group? That is the first scenario. In the second scenario, I'm going to start with the lived experience. Again, even though they are coming from rough neighborhoods, these high school students are interacting with developers from game companies they admire. We are trying to understand why these young men who had worked so hard all year learning introductory CS would not be interested in sitting for the test. They claimed that logistics was part of the reason. The test was offered at 8 a.m. at a different school than they attended on a school day, and none of them wanted to wake up that early to take public transportation there and miss school. But we suspect another factor was intimidation. Perhaps they feared taking the test at school that might be perceived as better or not doing well and losing the face of being tech savvy to their family and perhaps themselves. After 2 years of running the BPC program, we began to speak with authority of what these values are and how they impact learning CS. So in this example, the lived experience is from the perspective of researchers who are working with a specific marginalized population. And this is how they characterize that population. And so this is the lived experience I want you to keep in the back of your mind as you work through this scenario. So the scenario is as follows. You are excited as you have just received funding to do research developing educational technology for a historically excluded group. And you can take your pick, but these are just examples. It could be disabled students, it could be girls, it could be African Americans, Latinx, LGBTQ+, et cetera. You are doing this research because you want to help create a more inclusive environment in STEM education for all students. One of the research goals is to co-design and co-develop a mobile app that provides supplementary support for mapping STEM concepts to students' everyday experiences or funds of knowledge. Having done the groundwork of establishing partnerships with community-based organizations that service these marginalized populations, you proceed with a kickoff meeting to meet and interact with the staff, students, and parents with the hopes of recruiting participants for the 2-year research study. Unfortunately, only a handful of parents attend the kickoff meeting, and you need their permission to work with their children in the study. Your team of software developers are ready to go, but you are not sure if you will have a sufficient number of participants that are members of historically excluded groups. What can you do to help ensure that this research program actually benefits those who are often overlooked or not represented in large numbers in STEM? So the same questions apply. Again, put yourselves in the shoes of the PI and think about ways that this contributes towards diversity, but not necessarily equity and inclusion. And of course, given the scenario, what does equity look like? So I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those two scenarios. So are there any questions at this point before we break into small groups? Okay, so I think we're going to send you off into 2 different groups, and I think we are randomly assigning you to the group. And if you feel that you really must be with your best friend, but you can come back to the main room and Sherry will reassign you to the other group. This is like summer camp where you want to be in the swimming group and not the canoes. So, okay, excellent. So thank you, Sherry, for putting us into groups.
I'm going to open them up, so you're going to be taken away into those groups, and we'll see you in about 25 minutes.
Make sure to introduce yourselves. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that was productive and you had a chance to review the scenarios. And I have some guiding questions for us to think about. Aren't you glad I'm not a school teacher? I'm just a researcher. Drop my whip here. Let me share my screen for a moment. Okay. These are the, these are our reflection questions. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Screen here. Good. Would anyone like to share a bit about some key points or insights that you got in the small group with everyone here? I'll call on participants and facilitators both.
Yeah, I think I can summarize a few things from one of the sessions. We kind of focused on scenario one, and some of the thoughts were, it seemed like the proposal was written separately from the institutions without their inclusion earlier on in the development process. And that was part of the key problem, is not reaching out to the institutions early and basically writing a proposal and then targeting that institution, as opposed to doing the opposite and including them from the beginning. Almost seemed like an afterthought as opposed to a core collaboration. There were some thoughts that these minority institutions might have connections to local high schools that could be really valuable. Someone noted from the quote section that there seemed to be active interest from students already that was being dismissed. And so if you're not seeing representation of those that want to be included, here's a case where they actually are asking to be included and they're not. And it's really showing that, you know, it's placing the researcher in a position of power, as Kelly was mentioning, and that the institution's a partner but doesn't have equivalent power in that space. Jill was mentioning that there were some positive things, positive things about the scenario. It was a good idea to have paid positions to really apply value to those positions, and to have youth involved so that they can really see the path of how their research impacts the world. And then a couple kind of key questions that came up is if you're trying to develop this with a pre-existing relationship that you already understand, that's one thing. But if you're really trying to create a program like this to establish a new partnership, how do you do that how do you illustrate the potential of that relationship when you don't really know the dynamics of the relationship yet? And that led to a question of, are there actual funding sources for establishing new partnerships like that could bootstrap these things from the ground before writing a larger proposal like this? And maybe that would enable, you know, some better interactions with these partnerships earlier on, as opposed to having this proposal written and then pointed at an institution, building it from the ground up via perhaps a smaller bootstrapping grant of some kind. I think those are some of the key things that came up. Of course, anyone else in the big breakout rooms, please feel free to dive in and mention anything I didn't capture.
That's great, thank you, Erin. We also touched upon that, is how do you build trust so that you have that relationship going in, so when you do make the ask, that you know why you're being asked and whether or not you can participate, and the things that you had mentioned, Erin. And that is kind of an important step before collaboration can happen. Did you guys just look at scenario one?
Yeah, I think generally we focused on scenario one.
I'm wondering if there's anybody in your group that wants to share an example of something that might have helped illustrate the point of either a problem or challenge related to equity or inclusion or accessibility. And we have a lot of diverse expertise, at least within our group, that I got to learn from.
Yeah, any examples from the group on that?
And I know some of you can't get on, can't participate because of other things that are going on. Yes.
This happen quite often where even with research, there's a design that is proposed and there is some program or project that is meant to benefit a group of students, but when it comes to recruiting students for it or getting participation even with teachers and educators, that recruitment process happens after the design has been finished and has been already established. And I see this often where there's that disconnect from the design, the early stage design phase with recruitment efforts. And then it becomes difficult to actually get people to participate that you're really trying to target. And then all the funding or all the work that's gone into designing something isn't really serving the main group or population that it's meant to serve. And yeah, so I see this happen. I can't really give like a specific example, but this disconnect in the design phase and the recruitment phase for something is pretty common.
I wonder if there are any partnerships with centers or organizations kind of at the start of the project, or, you know, as Erin, you had mentioned, like, you know, as you're thinking about the ideas at the very beginning, to help with that recruitment, that already have these partnerships. Because I always realize that principal investigators have trouble, you know, because they've got to do the work, do the research as well, and then cultivate that partnership. But oftentimes there are other organizations that have much deeper partnerships and longer, you know, bigger networks in the community that could be leveraged through those partnerships, and having those conversations early to do that work. I was thinking in my in one of my projects the national, I'm forgetting, it was like a nanoscience project, and because the partners on my project had very close relationships with 2 museums in the Southwest, and they were trusted relationships when you know, we needed feedback on particular things. The families and the participants that were members of the museum, of course, were you know, saying, yes, we actually trust this institution because we are a community partner and we want to help like improve these things. But this project didn't have those initial partnerships. We had to bring other people who then had those relationships. I don't know if you guys have examples of that in your projects as well, or had worked in that way.
I'll just speak up here. So Sherry, what's helped me more recently, especially with this push for equity, is understanding what power I have as a researcher, and then being willing to redistribute that power. And so one of the ways that I've been working towards that is something. I actually approach organizations that are already active in their local communities and are doing work that addresses, say, for example, issues of resources and access for kids, typically, again, younger kids, elementary age, middle school. And so my approach is more or less to plug into what they're already doing, as opposed to me trying to come in and do something new. And that can be a risky situation as a researcher, right? Because we have our own research agenda. We have the things that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to make a name for ourselves in terms of, oh, I do this kind of research in this area in terms of the world of academia. And community-based organizations don't have those goals or that purview, right? They're motivated by something very different. And so what I found in doing that kind of work is that it means investing time. And I think this is the point that Sue was making in our organization, building those relationships. I spent a considerable amount of time getting to know who these organizations are and the people that they serve before I even began to even think about what it is I want to do from a research perspective. And I think that's important because then it positions them again as equal partners, because I'm now coming into this new relationship, asking how I can support efforts that they already have going on. And with that, it puts them in a position of power, because they get to explain and tell me what their goals are and how to best achieve those goals. It gives me access as well to the populations that they serve. So I'm not doing the heavy lifting of having to recruit. They already have access to the organizations and the groups that I want to work with. So it's about redistribution of power and who has a say so, and providing, again, not just a voice, but them to take actions and supporting those efforts. So it's nice. It's different when it's an experience where you're invited in, as opposed to when you come in with your own goals of how you want to do things. It changes the dynamics drastically, is my point.
Yeah, that's a really nice strategy. Is it Zareen? Am I pronouncing your name correctly? In the case that you raised, where the project has already launched, you already got the funding, you're a PI, and you've done some small scale testing in your smaller groups, you've worked out some usability, and now you're like, okay, now I've got to go find a group. I'm wondering, especially that reflects the diversity that is called for by the proposal. I'm wondering if there are people in this group that can share strategies of how you've dealt with that issue. I want to say it's an issue, it's an opportunity. It does sound like a very familiar kind of problem.
I'll speak to that again if you want me to. So I have received a grant, an NSF grant, and so I already had this, and this was fleshed out when I was teaching at Spelman, and I ended up transitioning to Florida State, which means I have to start all over again, right? So I've got this grant, but I now have to forge new relationships. And so I did come to one particular community-based organization, and I was like, I mentioned that I had the NSF grant to do this work, and they were excited, as in they saw an opportunity where their students would benefit, because in that grant I had you could say honorariums but something told me to wait. And what I mean by wait is I didn't barge in right away, start trying to implement it. It was for developing games around language learning. And the children were supposed to be code designers. But then I recognized very quickly when I did an assessment of what their resources were in terms of, do they have a computer lab where the kids can get on computers and learn how to code? And they just got a lab just as I was reaching out to them. So that means there's a learning curve, there's a setup mode, and all of those kinds of things. And what I had to appreciate was I had to really back down from my goals, because it was counter to where they were currently as an organization in light of having those resources. And in doing so, I had to reshape my project as well. And I had to be willing to do that, which was, again, that's scary, because you already have this proposal, this grant in this case, that you've fleshed out this program that was designed for a different population where you had relationships, and now I'm having to forge new ones. And so in doing so, I took a deep breath and said to myself, I can either push my initiative, which, by the way, the organization probably would have gone along with that, because they didn't have anyone that was coming to them and offering them anything different, right? They didn't have any other alternatives. I could have pushed that, but instead I decided not to. And I spent the first year hanging out with the kids, getting an understanding of their after-school program. And then I reformulated what the new program would be, what the new study would be with their help. And I let the kids drive that. So it pushed me in a different direction. And what I ended up doing was just writing an explanation. If you've ever received a grant, there's this annual report that you have to do where you talk about the work that you've accomplished or have not. So I had to provide an explanation as to why I did not move as I had agreed to in the initial acceptance of the proposal, which granted me the grant. And I explained thoroughly why I was moving in a different direction. And the program officer was okay with that. So sometimes it really is about building those relationships and taking a step back and again, shifting the power dynamics, because I could have pushed forward with my original agenda, it just would not have benefited that organization, truthfully, at all. It would have benefited me, but not them.
Right. And when I hear
Yeah, and I can, okay. Oh, I can definitely echo that to Yolanda. Coming from the kids we work with, we had a kind of a similar thing to what you were describing, where we had an intent going in of some pretty high level co-design with some of these kids. We're gonna co-design this mobile app for them. And what we really found was some of these kids were really too challenged on the spectrum to properly provide their input. And when I realized that, we started realizing we were really capturing more of the parents' design requests than the kids. And it was that point where we really had to decide, well, we have to take that step back that you're describing and change direction, because we weren't really representing the kids properly. And so I think that's a good takeaway, a good answer to the original question, which is one thing you need to do is stay open and stay flexible to changing direction if what you really want to do is proper inclusion and equity. And in order to do that, you need to have build those relationships with the people you're trying to represent properly, and accept a change in direction if that's really what's best for them.
And what I also hear you say, Erin, is that maybe traditional methods that we've heard about that are inclusive, like participatory design.
Exactly. We could go off on an entirely a session in and of itself on that alone, but that's exactly what we were doing. We're trying to head towards PD with these kids, and it was not working correctly. And what's interesting, though, going back to what Yolanda was saying, like there was a point at which we could have kind of proceeded and pushed in our original direction, and we could have reported out something, but we knew inherently what we would have been reporting really reflected the parents' input more than the child. And we had to stop and step back and realize, if we're trying to go for participatory design, this is not going to be it for these kids. And you have to kind of take that step back and realize that you're not doing it properly for a certain population. And just stay true to that. Stay true to, if these are the people you want to represent, then you need to build that relationship and understand what works for them.
That's great. Thank you, Erin, for that. I recognize we only have like 2 minutes, and we have some kind of transitional business to take care of. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join this session and to participate and to share your ideas. And I want to thank my other 3 co-facilitators. It was so nice to work with you leading up to this session and to run this expertise exchange session and have this kind of brain power. It's just really empowering. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sherry, who's going to transition and let us know what's happening next.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you to all the presenters, all of the participants for such an engaging and interesting session today. So actually, we have a little bit of a change in schedule. You may or may not have been aware of this, but due to some of our hiccups earlier, we're actually going to do our welcome and announcement session now. So we would head there at 5 p.m. Eastern time. It would be in swap card. So it's not going to show up at the end of your agenda versus the beginning like it was this morning. It should work this time. The video and audio feed should be playing when you get there. So I don't want to hold you up any longer. We hope to see you again tomorrow. We have another really great set of sessions. The gallery walk is tomorrow. If you haven't looked at those resources, please do and sign up for a gallery walk session for tomorrow. And that's about it. See you tomorrow morning and at the closing session now.